A meaningless world engenders fear. That is lesson 13 from the workbook of A Course in Miracles. All right, y'all, we are continuing the reading of Ken Wapnick's notes from A Journey Through the Workbook of A Course in Miracles. We're on lesson 13, A Meaningless World Engenders Fear. Let's dive in. Today's idea is really another form of the preceding one, except that it is more specific as to the emotion aroused. It is not just that it upsets you, it makes you fearful. Actually, a meaningless world is impossible. Nothing without meaning exists. However, it does not follow that you will not think you perceive something that has no meaning. On the contrary, you will be particularly likely to think you do perceive it. This is because you do not want to realize that what you perceive has no meaning. You are right, I don't want to know that. Once again, if what I see out there in the world has no meaning, the thought within me that gave rise to it has no meaning either. Since I am my thoughts, it follows that I do not have any meaning, which means I do not exist. Therefore, rather than realize everything is meaningless within and without, I will substitute my own meaning. Obviously, if I perceive something I think is out there, which affects me, I have already pronounced it real. And I want to keep the underlying thought so I can continue to be real. That is the whole basis, and that is the wild concept that A Course in Miracles is really saying. But at first glance, or maybe a lot of students, they just look right over this important topic of this world is a projection of our ego mind. It is not real. But we ain't ready for that truth. I sure am not. Like, I've studied this long enough to understand intellectually, but I don't think I grasp it. I don't think I ever will. I don't know if I'll ever be one of those enlightened people. I probably won't. But I get what they're putting down. It's just can't compute. I don't understand it. And probably I don't want to. I like my individual life. I love my little ego self. But this is why I read A Course in Miracles, to kind of get my mind willing and open to another way, because this way ain't working. All right, recognition of meaninglessness arouses intense anxiety in all the separated ones. The anxiety arises because at some level I realize that the meaningless extends to my existence. This idea will be returned to very shortly. It represents a situation in which God and the ego challenge each other as to whose meaning is to be written in the empty space that meaninglessness provides. The ego challenges, but God does not. That is why the word is in quotes. To the ego, then, competition is the nature of its relationship with God. An empty space exists because the ego is nothing, yet it believes it must get to the emptiness before God to claim the Son's identity as its own. Thus, the perceived competition with the Creator. If my existence as an ego is predicated on the belief in one or the other, I exist at God's expense, I killed him so I can live, I will project that thought and believe he is doing the same thing back to me. This deeply rooted belief is the source of our perception that people are out to get us, to hurt, abandon, and sabotage us because we accused ourselves of doing the same to others and ultimately to God. As Jesus states near the end of the text, you never hate your brother for his sins, but only for your own. Whatever form his sins appear to take, it but obscures the fact that you believe them to be yours, and therefore meriting a just attack. This is so wild. Once you read it over and over and over and over and over, you really see what he means. Because at first read, it's like, oh, what? I killed God. What are you talking about? This is like bananas. This is cuckoo. But when we attack, it's because we feel attacked. Or if we feel attacked, we are vulnerable. We believe that everybody is out to get us. And unconsciously, in the subconscious, unconscious recesses of our mind that aren't conscious, so don't blame yourself for not understanding this, believe that we ran away from heaven, we are in competition with God, and we think we're going to be punished, so we want to attack first. The ego does, not your true self, not our true selves. But we are so hypnotized and we are so identified with the ego, we don't even know there's our spiritual true identities. Hence, our whole existence of this painful reality at times. Yes, there's good times, but when you really look at it, we're born, we are in these blood suits, meat suits, and we just die. I mean, it's really sad if you think about it. It's like you love people and they just die. We get old and like, there it goes. Maybe we're lucky if we have 100 years. So if you really think about it, like, what kind of cruel God would create this? I don't think that God's cruel and he wouldn't create this. That's why A Course in Miracles is the only thing that makes sense, because sometimes when you like hear people try to spiritualize this world, it's like the math doesn't math. It like doesn't equal, it doesn't equate. I remember reading this book. It was one of my favorite books by Joseph Benner called The Impersonal Life. I really loved it, but it kept alluding to, God banished us from heaven for the sin or something, or we're here because God wanted to experience himself through different things. Like, that does not make sense to me. Why would God ever do that? I don't think God would. I think I would. I think it's like the ultimate prodigal son. Really, A Course in Miracles is telling the ultimate prodigal son story. We were happy at home with our loving father, and we thought we would be sneaky deaky and run away and try to have a better way and build our own little world. And we're realizing it's not working, that we made a boo-boo, and we just have to wake up from this dream because it never really happened, because God would never let that happen. But we believe that it's happening. Like, we believe in this grand illusion, this hoax, so to speak. And once we forgive it all, we realize on a deep level, this is all just an illusion. It's a projection of my mind. My thoughts create this world. All of our thoughts create this world. And all my job is to do is to forgive. Forgive it all. Forgive our way awake into real life, because this is not real life. This is a dream, according to A Course in Miracles. That was a long rant. I don't know if it made sense. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so he was saying, you never hate your brother for his sins, but only your own, whatever form his sins appears to take. It but obscures the fact that you believe them to be yours, and therefore meriting a just attack. The ego rushes in frantically to establish its own ideas there, fearful that the void may otherwise be used to demonstrate its own impotence and unreality. And on this alone, it is correct. Namely, that it is nothing. The ego knows, as I have explained before, that its power rests in the decision maker, because the ego, in and of itself, is impotent. I always like to say impotent. Impotent. It has no potency. It's impotent. To ensure that we never recognize its inherent nothingness and meaninglessness, it seeks to make itself important and powerful through sin, guilt, and fear. If I have sinned against God and destroyed him, I am certainly important and powerful. This also makes me fearful, but at least I have become something that God notices, which also makes me important. The most frightening thing of all to the ego is to realize God does not even know about us, because then we are literally nothing, impotent and unreal. Thus, we want God to pay attention to us, either because we are his most devoted follower or the most wretched sinner. It makes no difference to the ego as long as God takes notice. Our real fear, of course, is that he knows nothing about us. Somewhere deep inside, we know that to be true, meaning he does not know of us as individual egos down here in this illusion dream world. We are at home with God, and this whole dream is already over. We are just living it out until we can wake up and forgive the whole thing. But rather than accept that this is truth, we cover it over with the ego's lies, first with the thoughts of separation, sin, guilt, and fear, and next with a world that reflects those thoughts. It is essential, therefore, that you learn to recognize the meaninglessness and accept it without fear. This acceptance comes from developing a relationship with Jesus or the Holy Spirit that allows you to look at your ego without fear, helping you realize its meaninglessness. If you are fearful or guilty about your ego, or if you embrace it, you obviously believe it is real. Once again, however, if you step back and watch this oddly assorted procession go by, you realize it is nothing. Understanding its meaning lies in trying to protect you from what is meaningful. Finally, since we want that meaningfulness more than anything else, it is our identity as God's son, we would then realize everything else makes no sense and choose against it. If you are fearful, it is certain that you will endow the world with attributes that it does not possess and crowd it with images that do not exist. In this sense, we talk about the world as powerful, hostile, threatening, wonderful, peaceful, blissful, holy, etc. These are its attributes, and the images that do not exist are everything we see in the world, which are, of course, the projections of thoughts that do not exist. To the ego, illusions are safety devices, as they must also be to you who equate yourself with the ego. Safety devices are defenses. Sin, guilt, fear, and the world that arises from them are illusions, the purpose of which is to preserve the fundamental illusion that I exist as a separate individual. And now we go to the blockbuster line in the next paragraph. The exercise for today, which should be done about 3 or 4 times for not more than a minute or so at most each time, are to be practiced in a somewhat different way from the preceding ones. With eyes closed, repeat today's idea to yourself. Then open your eyes and look about you slowly, saying, I am looking at a meaningless world. Repeat this statement to yourself as you look about. Then close your eyes and conclude with, a meaningless world engenders fear because I think I am in competition with God. This is one of the earlier lessons that drove me insane. And I mean, after studying it a lot, I like I said, I kind of grasp what they're trying to say. I do not get it on a deep level. Like, I am looking at a meaningless world. I get that. I get it. Because I think I am in competition with God. I guess, like, I wanted to create my own world and I wanted to be right. I wanted to win. I don't want to admit that I made a mistake. So there's a part of me that's in competition with God. We thus go from our mind's thoughts to our body's perceptions and then back within. To state it once again, the world is fundamentally meaningless. Yet we strive to give it meaning, since that ultimately gives meaning to our separated self. Listening to the ego, we make up a thought system of sin, guilt, and fear. Our sin of separation leads to the experience of guilt, which culminates in the fearful belief that we deserve to be punished by a vengeful God, who now is in mortal competition with us for existence. Either he survives or we do, or, as the manual states, kill or be killed. But the inherent meaninglessness of this constellation of insanity does not preclude its having tremendous power, for we have invested our belief in it. Such investment means we must strive to give it meaning, so we can defend against the ego's meaningless thought system, which is the basis for our meaningless identity. To summarize this important point, when I realize the world is nothing, since it is simply a defense against my mind's thoughts, I am thrown back to these thoughts. If the world is meaningless and I am meaningless, I do not exist, which means God has won. But rather than lose the battle, I strive to give meaning to myself and to the world around me. Jesus is helping us realize how we project everything onto the world. If we pay careful attention to our perceptions and what we value here, we would realize none of them comes from anything inherent in the world, because there is no world. They are but the result of a need within ourselves to justify and reinforce the spurious fact that we exist. You may find it difficult to avoid resistance in one form or another to this concluding statement. Whatever form such resistance may take, remind yourself that you are really afraid of such a thought because of the vengeance of the enemy. The fear is that this is a competition we cannot win. God will be victorious. The terror engendered by such insanity is beyond what we can tolerate. We defend against it by constructing a thought system and then a world behind which we can hide. Having become identified with this defense that culminates in the body, we resist having it taken from us, which, exposing its foundation to the truth of the atonement, would surely do. You know what that reminds me of? Like, have you ever told a lie or tried to hide something and then you kept having to keep up the lie, and then everything on top of it's a lie, and you might live your whole life like that, and then you forget the original lie? and your whole entire life is built on like untruths and like not who you really are because you started with this one lie or you betrayed yourself or somebody else, and then you were just, you had too much pride or you just couldn't stand the pain of telling the truth, so you just kept building your life over it. That's kind of like what A Course in Miracles is saying our whole existence is for billions of years, millions of years, I don't know how many years, but if that's the truth, this is so far away from us. We have forgotten that we made this sin, this mistake, this error, that we could have been separate from God. And rather than admit that we were wrong and God was right, that we made a boo-boo, and it was just a thought. Remember, it's not real. We didn't really leave heaven. We just fell asleep. We forgot to laugh at the silly thought that we could have been separate. So here we are, individual separate egos, totally forgetting why we're here or what happened. Then we just suffer to the pains of this cruel world, right? We enjoy some of the good things, but at the end of the day, we all die. I mean, hello. It's just bananas. Having become identified with this defense that culminates in the body, like the body is the defense. We're hiding behind our body, like we really think we're this meat suit. But our spirits literally created this whole world to hide from, like, we think we're in big fat trouble, and we're not. This is great. So having become identified with this defense that culminates in the body, we resist having it taken from us. We don't want to die. We don't want to take it. I mean, look at all the people who are trying to like biohack and live to be like 500 years. Like, we are so hell bent on trying to roll this, shit show out when we all know we're going to die. So we resist so badly having this meat suit taken from us, which we're hiding behind. Our spirit, our truth is hiding behind. Our formlessness, our eternal nature is hiding behind this silly, silly costume that we call life, which, if it's taken from us, exposes our foundation to the truth that the atonement would surely do. So when we atone, we realize that this is just a mask. This is just a costume that we are hiding behind. We're hiding our true spiritual, eternal nature. And so we do not think about the wrath of God. That thought, as horrifying as it is, nonetheless protects the individual identity, which in turn defends against our acceptance of the atonement. You are not expected to believe the statement at this point, and will probably dismiss it as preposterous. I certainly did. Note carefully, however, any signs of overt or covert fear, which it may arouse. Obviously, if you are relatively new to A Course in Miracles, this statement will make no sense. See, I wish I had this book when I was first studying this. I love Ken, dang. So he says, obviously, if you are relatively new to A Course in Miracles, this statement will make absolutely no sense. But Jesus is asking for your vigilance, that you pay careful attention to any anxiety or fear that is within you. And that's what I love about A Course in Miracles. This is just a suggestion, like, as long as we just do this workbook, and that's how I got through it. It took me 7 years, if you ever heard my story. It took me 7 years to get through the workbook the first time. I have since did it one other time fully, and I'm just kind of going through it again on my own through these videos as well. But I kid you not, there is a rearrangement of the psyche when you really do these lessons. Like, even though we don't truly understand or compute, or we can't get on board with a meaningless world engenders fear. I mean, what does that mean? But I get it now. But if you're new to this, if this is your first time, just repeat it. A meaningless world engenders fear. A meaningless world engenders fear. A meaningless world causes fear within me. If I believe what A Course in Miracles, what Jesus apparently is telling me, that this world is meaningless, it's not real, that produces fear in me. A meaningless world engenders fear. Yeah, it does. And if we can just admit that, we don't have to understand what it means. Just repeat it. Just let those words sink in. It works. It works if you work it. I'm telling you what. This is our first attempt at stating an explicit cause and effect relationship of a kind which you are very inexperienced in recognizing. Do not dwell on the concluding statement, and try not even to think of it, except during the practice periods. That will suffice at present. The cause and effect connection is between our thoughts, the ego's thought system of sin, guilt, and fear, and the way we perceive the world. In other words, I am fearful not because of what is outside of me, but because of my thought system, which tells me that survival is between God and me. Note, 2, how Jesus does not confront or attack our resistance. He simply and gently reminds us of the truth. This allows us to accept it when we are ready, without any pressure or guilt inflicted upon us. A wonderful example for all course students. Ooh, so that was Ken Wapnick's notes from Lesson 13, A Meaningless World Engenders Fear, from a workbook from A Course in Miracles. And again, this book is a journey through the workbook of A Course in Miracles. I usually put the book in the beginning. All the information is below where you can purchase these. They come in a big old stack, a volume. So this one is Lesson 1 through 60, Volume 1 of 7 volumes. It's worth it. That's all I have to say. If you are a true student and you want to understand this better and you're going through the workbook, I highly recommend reading Ken's notes. I love reading these lessons every morning. I don't know how I get back on it, but today I read for myself Lesson 33. Oh, there is another way of looking at the world. Oh, I love this lesson. There is another way of looking at this. Anyways, if you're watching this all the way to the end, y'all, we're nuts reading A Course in Miracles. It's so good, but it has been my mental and spiritual sobriety. And you know what today is? Do you know what today is? Today is my 5th year of sobriety from alcohol. I got sober 5 years ago today, so I am celebrating that today. But A Course in Miracles, this blue book, my blue book's already on my nightstand, but A Course in Miracles has been my emotional and spiritual sobriety. Every time I get away from it, I know. So I need to at least read a paragraph. I have a great app that I use. I'll try to insert it here on the screen. But it is a simple little app. It's called ACIM Remind. It's that first one right there in the top corner. It's my very first app. And you can open it up and you can set alerts. And it gives you the lesson for the day. Again, I'm on lesson 33. And then they have the text reminder. So this goes off on my phone and it has a reminder of the text. There is another way of looking at this. So anyways, I love this. I love all of it. I hope you're having a wonderful journey through the workbook and that you're finding these videos valuable. Let me know how it's going for you. Lesson 13. We're gonna hop on to lesson 14 next time. I'm gonna try to do these a little more regularly. Lesson 14, God did not create a meaningless world. No, he did not, because this world is not real. All right, have a wonderful evening. I will see you next time.